Welcome to Woodbury Writes Podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Carlson, and I'm here today with author Gioia Diliberto. Welcome, Gioia.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, I am thrilled. Gioia is the author of 3 novels, 4 works of nonfiction, and a play. Her most recent work, Cocoa at the Ritz, is available here at Woodbury Public Library and looks like an exciting read. Gioia, would you tell us about yourself as a writer? What is your story?
Well, I've always been a writer, starting in 3rd grade, I think. There was never a question that I was going to do anything else. It was always just writing. I was always the writer in school, in elementary school, and my first short story was published in my little elementary school newspaper. The elementary school was called Burning Tree Elementary. It was in Bethesda, Maryland, and the newspaper was the Burning Tree Ash. And it was a great introduction to the vicissitudes of being a writer, because the morning that the paper was going to come out, and it was this was ages ago, in a different geological age practically. It was so long ago. It was mimeographed. And the day that it was supposed to come out, I went to school early, and there was the paper on every kid's chair. And my story was the first thing in the paper, except they put somebody else's name on it.
Oh, no.
And there was a mistake. And it was just this great tragedy, which, of course, in 3rd grade, it seemed like the end of the world to me. It was going to be my grand debut. So my mother, who was a teacher at another school, came over, but I had to wait because she was teaching at another school. I had to wait till the end of the school day. She came over, and she and I sat in the principal's office and crossed out the other girl's name and wrote in my name. And then the next day, the papers were redistributed with the proper my name written in. So that was sort of my first published work. And I was always interested more than anything in writing and in reading, because the two things go hand in hand. So
what do you suppose got you hooked at such an early age in that?
I have no clue. I just have my only memory is of being a writer and of reading constantly, and when I wasn't reading, writing. And I just never knew anything else, really. There was never any question that I was going to do something else. I certainly wasn't going to be a mathematician or a scientist, because I had no interest in that or ability.
And what was that story about in the Ash?
I can't really remember it too well. I think it was about my younger brother and our dog, probably. But I remember very vividly my mother's red dress sitting in the principal's office as we were crossing out the other girl's name and writing mine in.
Seems like an important lesson about protecting the integrity of your work. And
exactly.
I would imagine that was devastating for that other child as well, to have her name on something that wasn't hers.
And she was also she was a very talented writer too, but her thing was art. She was a really great artist, and in fact she grew up and became a professional artist.
Oh, that's neat. Can you tell us about your more current publishing history with your fiction and with your nonfiction?
Cocoa at the Ritz grew out of my obsession with Coco Chanel. And one thing that I had been interested in, being a Francophile, number one, I'd always been interested in Chanel as part of the modernist movement that was sweeping Paris and the world in the wake of World War I, and how what she was doing in fashion was connected to what Picasso was doing in painting, and Hemingway was doing in writing, and Stravinsky was doing in music, this paring away of the old and creating something new and simplifying. And that was my initial interest. And she knew all those people, and in fact had an affair with Stravinsky, and would have liked to have had an affair with Picasso, but he wasn't interested. And so I wrote this. My other novel about Coco Chanel was set right then after World War I. And in the course of researching that book, I found out that she had lived with a Nazi spy at the Ritz Hotel during the war, which was unknown at the time. This would have been 2000, not very well known in 2006. Now more people know about it. And that nothing was known about it. And so I tried to research it, but there was nothing. And part of it was because she didn't talk about it, and she paid people to take her out of their memoirs. So if you look in the memoirs, the people who were surrounding her at the time and her friends and associates, there's nothing about her or about this Nazi that she lived with.
So she wasn't innocent to the fact that he was a Nazi.
No, she was not.
And so she was interested in protecting her legacy, her reputation.
Right. But he had lived in France his entire adult life practically, and he didn't wear a uniform. And he worked for the Abwehr, and his boss was very anti-Hitler, and in fact was part of the plot to assassinate Hitler, and his boss, Wilhelm Canaris, was actually beheaded by Hitler. So it's unknown even how much her boyfriend believed in Nazi ideology. And I don't think Chanel believed in Nazi ideology either. But the most fascinating thing to me was that she was arrested after the liberation of Paris by the French forces of the interior, which were a band of resistance fighters and ex-soldiers and private citizens who'd taken up arms in the wake of the liberation and were going around France and arresting women who had affairs with Germans, or who had even been rumored to have had affairs with Germans, or who had even flirted too extravagantly with Germans. Some of them were just teenage girls, and they were shaving their heads. And if you go online, you can see these horrible pictures of these women being paraded through the streets of France with their heads shaved. Sometimes they painted swastikas on their foreheads, and they stripped them naked, they beat them up. It was just this really brutal period that Charles de Gaulle put an end to when he came back and set up courts to try collaborators officially. So these were the guys that arrested Chanel and took her away and interrogated her. And I just thought, wow, what happened? And why did they do that? And how did they do that? She was the most famous woman in Paris, and they just took her and stuffed her into a Jeep and took her somewhere and interrogated her. And I was gripped by this story, but because there was no information about it, as there would have been in an official court case, but this wasn't official, so it just disappeared into the ether.
Right.
And the only way to access the story and to sort of find meaning in it was imaginatively, was through a novel. And I was very interested in this question of the ambiguity of morality in war, and where is the culpability, and what makes you a collaborator, and what is collaboration, and all of these very difficult issues. And that was what led me to write this particular novel. So had there been an incredible amount of information, I would have written it as a nonfiction book.
Right. And given the sort of the dearth of first-hand resources, what were your resources for kind of reconstructing that period and that person? Like, what were your go-to resources?
Well, there are lots of books about the occupation, and I read them all. And there are lots of books about Chanel, so I read them all. So I just read everything that was out there. And then I had her, the reason I was able to do it was I had her voice in my head. We were talking before you turned the mic on about that. And so I could channel her. I could write Coco dialogue till the cows came home. So that helped a lot too. And then I just immersed myself in the period. And but as far as the actual interrogation went, I had to make that up because absolutely nothing was known. We do know a few things, that two guys picked her up and that they took her away and brought her back, and that they didn't shave her head. So based on that little scaffold, I constructed something which I hope is interesting and I hope makes sense.
Right. So would part of her avoiding that fate that so many other women went through be in large part because she was Coco Chanel, a woman of some influence in her time, or?
I don't know. I mean, I came up with something at the end, which I don't want to give the book away. It's unknown. It's unknown, why she was able to escape. Because there were famous women, though, who, I'm thinking of one in particular, who didn't escape. An actress named Arletty, who was so famous she only needed one name. And she, like Cher,
Yeah.
And she had lived with a German officer during the war, and she was arrested by these guys, and she ended up in prison. So she was probably as famous as Coco Chanel, and to a certain extent she had more impact on the culture in general because she was an actress, whereas Chanel's fame was through fashion and luxury. So I don't know.
And so as a result of her buying off others, buying her way out of other people's memoirs, did that allow her to reestablish her standing culturally and socially after the war?
Yes, what really allowed her to reestablish herself was her partner in the perfume company, which was where all the money came from. So Chanel No. 5 is still the most famous perfume on the planet. Every 30 seconds, somebody buys a bottle of Chanel No. 5. And her partners, and I write a little bit about this, her partners were Jewish, and they fled at the start of the war. They had owned one of the most prestigious perfume businesses in France. And when she got the idea of having a perfume to enhance her fashion back in the early 20s, she never dreamed that it was going to become this huge global success. And so she agreed to give them 80%. She agreed to let them have 80% of the profits. Another investor had 10 and she took 10. And then when it took off, she wanted more. And so she kept suing them to get more back. And nothing ever came of the lawsuits. And then when the Germans came and were wresting businesses from Jews, she went to the Gestapo and tried to get back 100% of the company for herself on the argument. And she knew they were safe in New York, so their lives weren't in danger. But she made the argument that they were Jews who had abandoned the company and it should revert to her, a Christian French woman. But they had outsmarted her. They managed to transfer their shares to an Aryan businessman who was making planes for the Luftwaffe. And the quid pro quo was that when the war was over, if the Allies won, they would give the perfume shares back to the Wertheimer brothers, and the Wertheimers would vouch for, his name was Felix Amiot, as being a patriot who was forced into making planes for the Luftwaffe. Whether he was or not, who knows. So after she fled to Switzerland, when she was released by the FFI, she was making these rival perfumes, basically cutting off her nose to spite her face, because it was Chanel No. 5 that was making them all rich, her too. And also the Wertheimers were worried that if word got out that she had lived with a Nazi during the war, that it would really hurt the brand. And also they couldn't have her manufacturing these rival perfumes. So Pierre Wertheimer went to Switzerland to talk to her, and he said, I'll give you anything you want, just stop. Oh, she was also bad-mouthing Chanel No. 5 and saying it was an inferior perfume and she would never wear it, and on and on. He said, you got to stop this. If you do, I will give you whatever you wanted. And what she wanted was to go back to Paris and get back into fashion. And so she did that. So when she came back to France, she shut up about all of that, and the Wertheimers were backing her return. But the thing was, the Parisians kind of knew that she had lived with this Nazi spy, and they panned her first collection in 1954. But in America, we didn't know about her personal life. So it was Americans, basically, who were responsible for her great return. And but then over time, the French kind of forgave her. So there are people who think she should be canceled because of this. And I get asked all the time, do I think Chanel should be canceled, and do I think her products should be boycotted? And I absolutely don't think that. I think that I make a distinction between the founder, the person, Coco Chanel, and the brand. And the brand is something completely different and employs a lot of people, and it's a great brand, and the people who own it are Jewish. And anyway, Chanel deserves credit for what she accomplished against all odds. She had grown up poor, she was an orphan, and so I just think if you want to wear Chanel, it's fine with me.
Well, it sounds like she was quite a shrewd businesswoman, and maybe somebody who knew how to leverage the ambiguity of the moral dilemma that she was in. So I can't wait to read it. And I'm. Is this your sort of your method when you are embarking on a new writing project, to immerse yourself in period literature and to just kind of absorb it? Because I know you've also written about the disco era in New York, for example. Right.
I try to own it as much as I can, and to do that I have to feel that I've read everything and that I know as much as I can. And then I'm always looking for, I know when you just mentioned the disco era, and I also wrote a book about the reformer Jane Addams, the Chicago reformer. What do these people have in common? Well, I'm always looking for women, because I write about women, who in their personalities and accomplishments seem to symbolize the spirit of their time, so that they transcend the details of their lives and come to their stories mean something larger than just their story. And so I think, in the case of Chanel, she stands for the treachery of France. Her treachery stands for the treachery of France, And Jane Addams stands for progressivism, at the turn of the century. And so I think that there is I have that in common with all of my subjects. And I'm always looking for that. I'm always looking for the subject that has some personal resonance for me, that I feel some emotional connection to, but also that has this cultural resonance.
Right, and very likely makes it possible for your reader to find him or herself in that text as well.
Right. Well, she's not sympathetic, so that was one of the most difficult things, because she's not a warm and fuzzy character. She's not someone that you're just like in there rooting for her. She's living with a Nazi. She's selfish. She's an opportunist, and I do think mainly she was an opportunist more than anything else. But to keep the reader engaged in a character like that is really hard, because you have to explain their behavior, and then it's palpable. Otherwise, they're just monsters.
Right. I just was thinking of Truman Capote in Cold Blood. I mean, that is the art, right? Is bringing us inside that world.
Right.
So as a reader, what kind of world do you like to immerse yourself in? What books have influenced you as a writer as well as a reader?
Well, just so many. Of course, the list includes, I think, what most writers would have on their lists, most writers of my age. George Eliot's work, especially Middlemarch, and Daniel Deronda, and F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, and Flaubert. And a writer that and there's a lot that's been published much more recently than Flaubert and George Eliot that I admire. And so I'm always reading contemporary fiction too. But a writer that I really admire is Carson McCullers. Have you read any Carson McCullers?
Oh, yes, years ago. And would you like to share something with us from McCullers?
And I love this book, The Member of the Wedding, so much. And she was writing at the time that Truman Capote, whom you just mentioned, was writing, and Flannery O'Connor. And both Flannery O'Connor and Truman Capote's reputations have lasted longer than hers. She was more famous than they were during her lifetime. And this book, The Member of the Wedding, which is a masterpiece, was a big hit, and it became a movie and a play. I think it's a movie, but I know it became a play. And why she is no longer read, I don't understand, because I just think she's a great writer. And when I was looking at this, I was going to read. I found this interview that Joyce Carol Oates did, another writer that
another great,
and I admire a great deal, read about this book, and I was just going to read it because it so expresses how I feel about it, and I thought, why not just let her say it, because she could say it. She said it so well. So she talks about this book, about why it's so good, and she says that it's because it's a realistic story, and it's so beautifully composed and nuanced, as original and haunting as any work by Eudora Welty, Catherine Ann Porter, or Virginia Woolf. According to her biographer, McCullers' biographer, Virginia Spencer Carr, McCullers wrote 7 drafts of The Member of the Wedding, yet there is nothing artificial or over-polished about its fluid poetic style or its brilliantly compressed drama. It's only like 165 pages. This heart-rending tale of 12-year-old Frankie Adams's infatuation with and inevitable exclusion from her brother's wedding is that rare work of the imagination, the rendering of experience so convincing that we may come to think of it as it having been our own. And I think that's so hard to do. And I can probably count on my hand, and you probably can too, the books you've read where you feel that that's happened. Sometimes we inhabit Frankie's head, teeming with thoughts and impressions. Often we float above her, amused and alarmed by turns, and understanding the disillusion to come as she hastens after the married couple with her own suitcase. So what's happening here is that she's this disaffected young teenager who is just craving to get outside of herself and have a big experience, and she gets super excited when she hears that her brother is about to get married, and she decides that she wants to be part of the wedding, and then she decides that she wants to run away with them and be part of them, and she talks about the we of me. So this is the passage that I thought was just so beautiful and evocative. This is after they've gotten, the couple, her brother and his wife, have gotten married in the house, and she wants to go with them. When Mr. Williams brought their bags, she hastened after with her own suitcase. The rest was like some nightmare show in which a wild girl in the audience breaks onto the stage to take upon herself an unplanned part that was never written or meant to be. You are the we of me, her heart was saying. But she could only say aloud, take me. And they pleaded and begged with her, but she was already in the car. At the last, she clung to the steering wheel until her father and somebody else had hauled and dragged her from the car, and even then she could only cry in the dust of the empty road, take me, take me. But there was only the wedding company to hear, for the bride and her brother had driven away.
Oh, wow, the yearning to be understood. And
right, exactly. And I just thought that, you know, the character that Carson McCullers created here is so authentic, and it has nothing to do with, it's timeless. I mean, it has nothing to do with what's going on in the world now or politics or anything. It's just this beautiful, probing novel about a girl struggling to grow up.
Yeah, I wonder if in the multiple revision process, it's less about the polish than the getting to know that character even better each time.
Right.
You know, and it becomes even more nuanced with each revisiting of the character.
Right.
That's very powerful. Gioia, would you I'm just thinking about Carson McCullers and authors of place, and this sort of the way region and where we come from can affect our voice as writers, or not.
Right.
And I'm just curious, what is the role of place for you in writing?
I wish that I came from a place. You know, I wish that I had that strong connection. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and my parents died when I was a very young woman, and I was married fairly young, and so my husband and I moved to New York. So I felt like a New Yorker, you know, then, and that would be sort of, and then we traveled to France a lot, and a lot of my books are set in France, and so I felt that France was also something that I felt a strong emotional attachment to, but I never had that sense of place that Carson McCullers had and Flannery O'Connor had, and Eudora Welty had. or Truman Capote had about the South, or that, you know, a lot of my friends have about staying in the place where they were born and raised. And maybe you have that, maybe you're a native Connecticut person.
Yeah.
And I wish I had that. I really am very envious of people who have that, because I think it's a real treasure. I think it's a really wonderful thing to feel that. And I don't. And so, I mean, maybe that's also why I am attracted to writing historical fiction and biography, because I crave being part of somebody else's place and somebody else's life. But when I'm writing about a place, like in France, and now all these books that I've written have been set in France, I try to feel it and to get that, to communicate that on the page.
That's really wonderful, and I hope Woodbury becomes that place
Yes.
for you. I think it's a great place to call home, and it's great that you're a part of it now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would you mind sort of reading something from Cocoa at the Ritz for us,
Sure.
just to leave our listeners with
Sure.
your voice?
This was the last lines of the book, to me, sum up the theme that I was trying to get across. And it's been very wonderful for me when readers have responded to it. At some events I've done, readers have come up to me and said, "Oh, I love the ending so much," and that is very gratifying, because it just seems to me to sum up everything that I wanted to say and what the point of the book is. And the point of the book is the importance of standing against evil. So during the occupation of France during World War II, you had this unusual situation where there was a stark contrast between good and evil. And most of us don't have that in our lives, thank God. But it's still important to stand up when you see injustice. And the poet André Gide said that most people during the occupation were not villains of collaboration or heroes of resistance. Most people were just in the middle, like old shoes floating through murky waters, trying to stay afloat. But that being said, someone like Chanel was not standing up against evil. She didn't have to move in with this guy. She could have she had a country house. And so at the end of the book, I have her suffering for the choices that she made. And the last part of the book is she's released from interrogation. The FFI has let her go. And she goes back to the Ritz, where she has her apartment, and her apartment across the street above her boutique. And she's packing to leave because she's going to go live in Switzerland in exile, because she's pretty sure that it's not going to be a favorable environment for her in Paris because of her living with this German. So one thing she did before she left was she put a notice in the window of her boutique offering to give away bottles of perfume to the soldiers, American soldiers, thinking that maybe that would earn her some goodwill from the authorities who might not think well of her. And so she's packing now. And across the street in Coco's boutique at 31 Rue Cambon, the saleswoman, Angeline, was giving away Chanel No. 5. An American soldier, one of thousands, would return home with a bottle in his rucksack. He would give it to his mother, and whenever she wore the perfume, as she would every day for the rest of her life, replacing this bottle many times over the years, she would think of the miracle of her son's return. And this is how we forget, with each drop of golden scent, the golden scent of treasured life, the golden scent that masks the dishonor of the world.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gioia.
Thanks.
So our local listeners can definitely get a copy of or borrow Cocoa at the Ritz at the Woodbury Public Library. Where else are your books available?
Wherever books are sold.
That's easy. And if people want to preview the books on your website, what is your web address?
It's my name, which has a lot of vowels, gioiadiliberto.com.
Well, thank you very much for a really illuminating conversation and a great insight into your book. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sandy. It was a great pleasure.